Is your organization truly prepared to withstand a major cyber disruption? I mean, not just survive it, but continue functioning through it. According to Worldwide Technology's Security Priorities for 2025 research, the question isn't if you'll face a cyber incident, it's when. And the landscape has evolved far beyond just malicious attacks. Today, we're going to explore how organizations now face three distinct types of cyber incidents: malicious attacks, mistakes, and malfunctions, 3Ms. And this is especially as AI becomes more integrated into our operations. So how do you shift from prevention-only thinking to a comprehensive resilient strategy? What happens when you accept that disruptions are inevitable and focus instead on maintaining critical business operations? And why is a coordinated business-focused approach essential for true cyber resilience? Well, today, Kate Kuehn, Area Vice President of Cyber Advocacy, and Angela Brandt, Senior Director of Cyber Consulting Services at Worldwide Technology, they both join us to address Priority 3 from their research, Building a Comprehensive Cyber Resilience Strategy. They're going to help us understand the full life cycle of cyber resilience, from proactive operational planning to financial risk transfer to incident response and recovery, how to create a strategy that protects what matters most to your business. My name is Rob Boyd. Welcome to WWT Presents Research.
WWT Presents Research.
Kate, how do you describe what you do? How are they referring to you over at Worldwide Technology these days?
So I'm the Area Vice President of Cyber Advocacy. And Rob, it's great to be here today, and especially with my good friend Angela. Responsibilities are this: we're still really focusing on cyber advocacy and how do we help executives, risk executives, understand the world that is cyber. In addition, we have our field CISO team that really helps become the advocate or the advisor when we see complex issues that CISOs, risk executives need a second opinion on. So really excited about us really focusing this year on things like we're going to talk about today: cyber resilience, SOC of the future, zero trust. There's a lot of really complex issues and areas that we're looking at from an advocacy perspective.
Well, this is always fun talking to you guys because you're out in the mix. You guys know each other. I think you date back to a previous company, if we go back far enough. You're both in similar roles, but distinct. Angela, how would you describe what you do for Worldwide Technology?
I'm a senior director with the Security Consulting Organization. We're actually, within my organization that I'm a part of, we deliver engagements to clients to help them achieve their cyber resilience outcomes and their cybersecurity outcomes. So within our organization, we are the next step after Kate's world, where she's advocating and working with executives, working with boards, helping them understand and needs when things get real and they're ready for real help and ready for folks to come alongside them to create and build and enhance and mature the solutions that they have or that they need to accomplish those secure outcomes. It's the organization that I'm part of that comes to the table. So within our group, we have solutions architects that help craft what those solutions look like and how they incrementally help organizations move towards those secure outcomes and goals. I'm thrilled to be here with her as well, because this is so fun to work with her, not just at Worldwide, but having this conversation as well.
We've been friends for a long time and worked together for a long time. And the best way, Angela just said it, it's a yin and yang. Our group on this side is the vision. We set the pace, and Angela makes sure we can execute the outcome and deliver on it. There's the yin and the yang.
No, I like that. And I would imagine, because it sounds like as much as you guys are friendly with each other and you run in similar worlds, I would bet you don't get a chance to spend and slow down and actually catch up with each other that often. So this is fun to at least be able to create that, force that situation, so to speak, on this. Well, we're talking today about Priority 3 in the 2025 Security Priorities Report, and Priority 3 is around building a cyber resilience strategy. What do we need to understand about the meaning of resilience, and why is it important now?
It's no surprise that we live in a digital world, and organizations are highly reliant on technology now in every asset of the business. There isn't an aspect of business that doesn't have some type of technology tied to it. There is a cyber component, whether we're talking malicious mistake or malfunction to every area of technology. And so when you think about it from that lens, and now AI coming in, being able to ensure that your company will stand up if there is an issue, that things will continue to function, that your systems will be able to recover, that your customers will be able to continue to use and access you, that's critical. And it's not being able to just roll back to paper anymore. We can't just go back to the way we were before technology. We can't. And so resilience means being able to achieve at least a minimum viable business if something goes wrong.
You're saying, hey, you're going to get hit. There is going to be something. It may not be as big and public, hopefully, but that's what you have to prepare for. And so you have to take the attitude that, well, how do you respond? How does the entire organization cohesively come together and say, we need to be more resilient in the face of these situations, which we know are going to happen. We can't predict where they're going to happen. But it sounds like the idea is, how do you keep the business operational?
You said you're going to get hit. That's an old thinking. And what I mean by that is, it's not just now malicious threat actors that are going to come and attack your organization. You can have mistakes made. Insiders can accidentally do something. Your new AI model that's doing chatbot work with your help desk decides to spit out crazy information. We're not quite sure why. You have to now start thinking about resilience for all those types of scenarios. So it's not a question of if, it is a question of when, and it's a question of making sure that we're thinking about it holistically, not just the bad guys in the corner.
Thank you for that. That's a fantastic point, because yeah, some of the biggest things we've seen just in the last few years are from bad routing updates that percolate across a network and suddenly take things down to cloud, computing missteps. So Angela, your thoughts on why cyber resilience is top of mind as a priority this year?
This is about business operations. It's about keeping an organization operational. Every business out there relies on technology now. I can't think of any, and I challenge anyone to think of a business that does not rely in some way on technology to conduct the business that they are in, to deliver results to their stakeholders, to deliver results to their clients and customers. Recognizing the reliance that organizations have on technology now means that those same organizations need to really consider what happens when a malicious actor, that it does happen, it will continue to happen. It needs to be one of the areas of thinking. When there's a mistake made, that happens. Insider threat is an area that in the industry we've looked at for a long time, and we've understood for a long time that insider threat can be malicious, and it can simply be accidents too. But the new one, the malfunction, I think is really different and requiring additional thinking when we're thinking about how we're leveraging technology and what we're doing to ensure that that technology is working for us and is going to be there when we're needing it. And when the time comes, should one of those impacts happen, is the organization prepared to address that? Have they considered not just the technology elements, but the people and the process elements as well that go alongside keeping that operational focus running? And these are complex, integrated ecosystems that everything has to be working together at every layer to enable that outcome. So, this is complex work that's incredibly important for organizations to keep their lights on and deliver for their clients what they have committed to deliver. You think about healthcare and healthcare organizations, hospitals. What happens if a hospital has an incident, whether it's malicious or otherwise, whether it's a malfunction or otherwise? How do they provide care for their patients? You think about hospitality organizations. What if a mistake is made and hundreds and hundreds of people can't even get into their hotel rooms because the key cards are tied to a technology? If you take a step back and you think about you as an individual in the world and every bit of technology interaction you have just in your daily life, A company somewhere is enabling that and relying on it to work. So this is a really important topic for organizations to be thinking about and planning for.
We need to understand those dependencies and what part they play and what's our risk exposure to any of those happening, because you can't simply go, well, that's not my fault. They're part of my supply chain. Well, regulators are expecting you to understand your supply chain, and they're going to hold you responsible, for that these days. Let's jump into the steps for action here, because one of the things I like about the research reports is that we can easily get caught up and talk forever at theory and good practices and things like this. But I want to get specific. And the nice thing is every research report has these action steps, in this case, for building cyber resilience. So as we look at how practical we can get, there's 5 of them here. Conduct a comprehensive cyber resilience assessment. Then we get into a quantitative risk assessment for number 2, operational resilience for 3, then response and recovery plan development, and then regulatory compliance. So I want to go through these and kind of use these as a way to anchor our conversation. But Kate, when it comes to an assessment, what is a resilience assessment? How do we make that real and actionable?
Well, so resilience assessment kind of looks at a couple of things. But what we're looking for from a theme perspective when thinking about cyber resilience is, what is the minimum viable business? What are you trying to ensure actually does need to come back up? And when you look at it from an assessment perspective, again, I always talk about that you could spend every dollar an organization makes on security solutions, and they're still not going to be effective. You have to understand, what are the business priorities and objectives that are critical to the company? What are the assets, whether that's data, most of the time it is, or is it a manufacturing site? What's critical? Where in the world are these things located? How do we look at it? And how do we start to then understand what happens, or what's the impact if something goes down? What's the supply chain around it? What are the SLAs we need around? What are the factors we don't have control over? The idea of understanding your third and fourth party supplier risk is really a dark art. There's some that are like, yes, we can totally do it. And there's others like, dude, there's no way. But the reality is we have to actually prepare for being self-sustaining if something does go down. And that's where this first assessment becomes so critical. Understanding your business priorities, not your technology priorities, not where you think you are on a heat map. What are the business priorities? How do we achieve minimum viable business? And what is the impact if we have something happen in the supply chain? And who are those partners?
I think most businesses think about this in terms, or should be thinking about this in terms of business priorities. Kind of the comments I was making previously about this being a business problem and keeping a business operational to deliver for their clients. This is a business problem. When those assessments happen, it should be an assessment at that business layer. It should be inclusive of those business considerations. Like, what is your return to operations target? What is critical to your business to maintain and to get back online as quickly as you can? There are measurable targets that organizations should be thinking about for themselves. And we often think of them as RTO, return to operations. How quickly can you accomplish that? And for what subset of activities must that be done, and how quickly? So that first step to having an exploratory conversation, almost an alignment conversation, both within an organization as well as security practitioners who have walked this journey before, of course, who can provide guidance. But having that internal conversation with those internal business stakeholders, helping guide them through this conversation. And I'm really interested, Kate, you talk to a lot of boards, you talk to a lot of executive panels. How are they having this conversation about return to operations and the business resiliency? Are you hearing from them how they're thinking about this?
Yeah, we're hearing there's a lot of conversation around it. And I think there's 2 main themes that we're seeing. How does a company look at achieving now at this point stepped change, measurable achievements in cyber resilience? What I mean by that is, if they are looking at their minimum viable company and they're only able to bring back up 25% or 50% in X, how do they get to 75% in certain areas? The boards a couple of years ago were like, well, we just need to bring everything back up. They're realizing that can't happen. So the conversations we're hearing right now is, what are our critical functions? What's going to hurt us from a reputational risk perspective? What do we need to think about from an operational perspective? If we have to pick business line A or B and it becomes a choice, which one is it? And how do we, in essence, message that? But companies are starting to realize that you can't do everything at once. What we saw last year from some of the big breaches that were in the health, in the health services area was you can't just recover. It can be months, it could be years to do everything back up. And so how is the impact of your business units? What goes down where? What's the segmentation? How do you approach? Those are things that boards are really starting to look at. The other thing that I hear a lot from the boards is we sometimes get it wrong of who should be part of that business assessment. I get asked a lot, how do I know to trust my risk executive? How do I know if I have a good CISO? How do I know if they're going to be the right person to put this plan together? And the reality is while they should be in the room, as should the CIO, the CTO, and the technical people, they're only one part of this. You have to think about it holistically, whether you're talking HR, whether you're talking even marketing, if you're thinking about comms planning and your critical comms, it's a much wider team than people think. And Angela, how do you think we need to message that, through an assessment process? Do you see companies kind of having that aha moment that it's not just tech?
There is an aha moment. And I'm encouraged actually by what I am observing happening in a lot of the organizations that we're talking to. Historically, there has been, for lack of a better word, siloing of responsibilities. There's an IT responsibility, there's a cybersecurity responsibility, there is a risk, like enterprise risk often lives in or at certain points in history has lived in a different place than IT or cyber. Then there's legal. Of course, legal has a major role to play in a lot of this, believe it or not. There are a lot of stakeholders who are impacted in these events because it is a business event. And it is encouraging to see as we are having these conversations with organizations that they are bringing integrated groups of leadership to the conversation. We are talking across CISOs, CIOs, CTOs. We're in IT. We've got legal at the table. We've got compliance at the table. We've got supply chain at the table, which sometimes actually functions as a part of legal. And they are now in these conversations as well. To get this right, it requires an ecosystem of technology that's working well in an integrated way, all the technology pieces doing their part. It requires an integrated group of leadership driving forward as well. And I'm really encouraged to see that more and more organizations, and maybe it's to the credit of folks like Kate who are having these conversations at the board level, who are opening these conversations and talking about this as a business problem. To the credit of those conversations, helping broaden the audiences that are joining and participating, and really driving a different outcome for their businesses with this cyber focused area.
Well, I know we've always talked about top down being so critical, but I feel like one nuance, maybe it's not much of a nuance, but Kate, I keep hearing you talk about board level as being the top, not CEO, although I'm sure CEO is important. What I hear both of you saying is we need information from multiple areas of responsibility, because these are theoretically the experts for their domain for your company, including supply chain and all that probably entails. But getting them together and then hearing their priorities, but then someone or somebody has to be able to say, love what you're saying here, agree that these things are important, but here's what we have to do as a company and my expectation, for how we're going to do this together.
You're on track in some perspective. This is the critical thing. So every board sets two things with their C-suite every year. One is, what are your critical performance indicators? What are your KPIs? What do you want to achieve this year? I want to grow by 15% in APAC. I want to open new facilities in Kuala Lumpur. We're going to go do some exploratory work in Mexico. Whatever those things are. We're going to open a new business line in AI and become the next, big seller on TikTok. God knows what it is, but you get the point. There's objectives. When you talk about resiliency, you then have to think about, okay, how do we secure these things? What are the security considerations? And let me take it a step further. What are the cyber? Because cyber by definition is anything that deals with computer and computer transmission. What are the cyber considerations? And so when you think about that, there's, from a board perspective, you have to think about liability, supply chain disruption, product risk, regulatory, business interruption, reputational risk, breach expense, and technology infrastructure. It's not just let's throw some technology around it and make sure it's secure anymore. And yeah, it's a total business model. And the reality is that this isn't going to go away. So I'll share two stats. This year in 2025, we expect cyber events to cost $1.5 trillion. We also expect the new markets generated by AI technology to exceed 4.5 trillion this year in new market generation. This isn't going away. So when you start to think about what Angela's talking about this being a business issue and a board level issue, it's a question of when we think about how we're going to be resilient and continue the accelerated pace of technology, we have to look at it not only from all the lenses I just talked about, but take those lenses and look at it from a legal, financial, human capital, operational, technical, and external perspective as well. It's complex.
Very.
I want to move on to priority, or not priority,
Have
action
we scared you
step
enough,
2.
Rob? You really want to go to 2?
I'm a little bit scared, but no, I think that's necessary. In step 2, we talk about developing a quantitative risk assessment, and you were already starting to talk about in the risk analysis. Sorry, assessment was on step 1, but on that assessment, you were talking about the need to quantify where things stand. And so I guess is the risk part then putting some numbers against how likely these things are to be impacted and what that result would be?
So remember, I'm the vision lady. Angela's the outcome lady. She's much better with numbers to start than I am.
Yeah, Angela, how to solve this for us? Tell us more about number 2 on conducting a risk analysis.
The quantitative risk analysis, it's a tool that we use, that every organization should use to get to measurable decisions, data-driven decisions. At the end of the day, you have to make choices about the right things to prepare in the event of an outage, whether it's malicious or otherwise, as we discussed. You can't do it all. You have to make choices about how you're going to do prevention, how you're going to set up the right set of circumstances to withstand potentially, and how you're going to recover. And you can't recover everything, so you have to make choices. The best way to make choices in many cases is, well, it's complicated, but data is really helpful. And quantitative risk assessments allow us to get to that data foundation of choice making. So in a quantitative risk assessment, what we're really looking at is where are you in terms of maturity in the ecosystem of things, people, process, and technology that support your ability to be cyber resilient. And we create a baseline and we say, this is your current position. And now, how can we help you make the most of your next steps? What are the best next steps to make? The most efficient, the most cost-effective, and the best outcomes for the next steps based on the direction that your business needs to go. Part of this is tied to the security controls that you may have in place already, of course. And the other part of this is financial, because organizations are growing their capabilities based on technology, opening new markets with technology. There is an investment to be made in securing your cyber resiliency, and you have to be thinking, how do I spend in the right places to mature my cyber resiliency without overspending and without undercutting my cyber resilience posture? When we think about the quantitative risk assessment, one of the pieces of data that's in that capability set is financial. And we're able to model, this is your baseline today. And if you were to modify and invest in certain capabilities, it would create this new baseline. So we can actually model that and show organizations how specific investments and specific roadmaps will change those outcomes for them in the long run. So having that foundation of data is a critical piece of decision making when it comes to how you take the next steps to become more cyber resilient than you are today.
Is there any kind of distinction that's important to understand between a quantitative risk assessment and a kind of a general risk assessment?
Yeah, I think there is. When Angela talks about the importance of data and being able to actually put numbers behind things, I'll tell you as a practitioner, this has been an area that's been considered almost a dark art, as far as how you approach and understand and assess your own maturity in cyber resilience. There's a lot of solutions out there. There's a lot of institutes out there. Would you agree with me, Angela? It's been a bit of a dark art. And what I love about how I'm seeing the approach that we have and we're seeing the market take is what we're talking about with the general is, again, getting the lens from a business perspective. How do we keep the business viable? This goes down a step and says, okay, to keep the business viable, here's how you should be thinking about approach. And here's the numbers and the data behind it that are giving you an indicator of what the impact is. Business risk, you need to talk dollars and cents. We're not going back to the days of sales where it's like, I have an ROI tool and I'm going to sell you this and you're going to get this much back and it's amazing. And you're like, no, not going to happen. What this does is leverages material data about the organization that gives you an indicator of either the anticipated cost of investment or what I like to call the anticipated cost of disruption. If you don't, here's what the cost to the business is. And that's a much easier thing for me to discuss with a board than go buy my new Palo.
Other than being obviously specific to risk, specific to cyber, and some other things that will be new maybe for some people or need more emphasis, it also sounds like a lot of these things are the normal type of decision making you would make as a business anyway. And so when you speak to a board who understands business decisions, because it's all about saying we can't go after everything. We can only do a subset. So what's the most important subset based on what we need to achieve in what time frame and what our current resources are? We minimize risk. We never eliminate it. Some important frameworks. I know, Kate, you're always teaching me some ways to look at these things. But I don't know, is that oversimplifying?
No, it's not. And I'd love Angela to weigh in on this too, but here's, you said it, Rob, you actually can go after everything if you have this magical, thing called an unlimited budget. I haven't met a CISO yet that's found the magic pot of gold at the end of rainbow for the unlimited budget. So if you have, the ability to quantify and qualify what the risk is if you don't have unlimited budget and prioritize, okay, here's what I see is, we have to do 1, 2, and 3 on the bucket list. Here's what 4 is. You have a choice, Mr. CEO, Mr. Board, Mrs. Board, whatever you want to call. If you want me to attach 4, if you want me to focus on this, here's the dollar. If we don't, here's the risk, and here's the dollar associated with that. It gives a very real discussion around what the impact of the business is.
I think we should also mention that businesses have a few different tools in their kit for dealing with risk, and cyber resilience, being a risk reduction method or risk reduction approach. It does require the ecosystem of integrated things working well together, which does require investment. And businesses, boards want to make the most of their dollars, but they also have cyber insurance that they can leverage to reduce risk to their business, right? But you're never going to see a cyber insurance policy cover everything. There's always going to be a gap. It's just like homeowners insurance, et cetera, where there is a cap. And then if your loss is greater than that cap, there's going to be a gap. You're going to have to somehow come up with the funds to cover what your insurance doesn't cover. So, and every business is making those decisions for themselves about what's the right amount of cyber insurance for them A lot of the cyber insurance companies like the idea that businesses are using quantitative risk assessments to better understand what their current position is and where their risk is, and that they can show that they're taking active steps toward reducing risk. That helps the cyber insurers, first of all. Those organizations that are doing this type of risk assessment work will have a better relationship with their cyber insurers.
Because they're looking at what is their exposure to your risk,
100%.
and that's going to factor into their decision of what they cover.
Entirely right.
You know, like buying a home in Florida on the beach, fantastic, but you may not get all the insurance to replace your home should suddenly it become more than waterfront.
Well, and Angela, you really hit on it, and this is a point that I think is critical when you think about cyber resilience. We're talking about cyber resilience holistically, but the reality is the practice that we have really focuses on the operational, the proactive resilience part that we're talking about today. Yeah, and when you think about cyber resilience, it's actually a life cycle. You have the operational resilience in the front. How do you plan? How do you create that minimum viable business, minimum viable company? How do you ensure you have the right building blocks? And to your point, that feeds in then to the financial transfer aspect of it, which is your cyber insurance, your toleration of risk. How much money are you willing to spend or lose? And do you understand the risks around it, and how do you insure for it? And so if you've done good planning on the operational side, that lends into having a very educated view of what your financial transfer is. And then the other side is recovery and response. When something does go wrong, you have an incident, when one of the three M's, malicious, mistake, malfunction happens, how do you respond and how do you ultimately recover? And we here, and we're not talking about as much today, have the recovery and response function as well, as far as how do you restore systems? How do you bring things back up? That's actually the whole cyber resilience story. And you're right, Angela, if we do the assessments correct, it really does feed into better insurability.
When you guys were already talking about, so operational resilience, which was action step 3, where we talk about how do we enhance that type of thing. Oh, a little bit, but that's not new. That's all pretty much par for this course. Step number 4 is around building a cyber incident response and recovery plan, which all of a sudden I feel like this, even though we're not to step 5, but this starts to feel like we're coming in that full circle approach, which is like, how do you take all the stuff you're talking about here and put it into something that is realistic for your company? And how do you know how to respond and who's involved? When it comes to documenting this kind of stuff and planning for it, how are you seeing people these days handle that? What are the best companies doing, and what are you advising?
It's a combination of activities that all have to be happening throughout the business. One of the most effective ways of validating your readiness, your recovery readiness, is tabletop exercises, as an example, where everybody in the business, all the impacted teams, participate in safe exercises, what if exercises. What if this happened? Like, what do we do? And out of that, the development of playbooks, so that there is clarity on what to do. We all did fire drills as kids in schools, right? You had to know what to do when the moment happened, right? Fire drills, not nuclear bombs. A couple of things I think get really tactical and help organizations understand sort of where they are in their thinking and their adoption and their readiness for this type of resiliency and recovery. Tabletop exercises at every different layer within impacted teams within the organization. Sometimes places will do just executive level tabletops, or they might do just IT level tabletops, and they're disconnected from one another. But in a real situation, all of those teams are actioning in parallel, and they're interacting with one another. A good set of integrated tabletop exercises where it's not a siloed event, but where you've got parallel activities happening at different tactical layers all the way up, potentially even through the board. One example, last year here at Worldwide, we did a board level, executive level tabletop exercise for an organization whose board had never been through anything like that before, and they were blown away with understanding now how complex this is and how challenging it is to make decisions in the heat of the moment when the events are happening. Highly recommend integrated tabletops so that you've got that clarity, and coming out of those, the development of playbooks that you can repeat. This is never one and done. This needs to be a cadence of practice over the course of time to ensure that everybody's got good readiness to respond.
It's interesting, and Angela, I couldn't agree more. We had a group of, CISOs and former CISOs together a couple of weeks ago, and somebody said that, when you're in a breach scenario and you're trying to coordinate all the groups and get everything together, it's kind of like trying to conduct a symphony across a three-ring circus. We were all asked, what's the most important thing you need to have to prepare? And all of us said comms plans and playbooks. Until you're actually sitting in that seat, having something go wrong, you don't realize that you have to have HR contacts involved. You have to have your legal team involved. You have to have your marketing team involved if there's any type of customer comm that needs to go out. You have to understand your obligations from a regulatory perspective, an internal customer perspective, your own employees. How often are you going to communicate? Who do you need to communicate with? Your supply chain? Do you need things take up, down? There's a million different little nuances that either will create it sounds funny, a successful breach, which means that you don't have a ton of reputational damage or you minimize the blast radius, or you're standing in front of the board explaining why it went wrong and why you weren't able to recover quickly. And that's a very different scenario that a lot of times, really the difference is good comm planning and playbooks.
Because the idea is you want to learn where you were misinformed or didn't plan correctly when it's safe to learn that. It feels like one of those things where you go, you don't want to be new. It should be deja vu. So the idea is that you've already kind of got some muscle memory and you're not in freak out. You're in, okay, we've seen this before. We've practiced for this. Now let's execute. And obviously everything is different in reality. And you'll learn from that. And I would imagine that even actual responses need to inform the updating of the playbook. What kind of timing are we talking about here? I'm sure it varies by industry and by group, but are these things once a year or once every 6 months? Are there some that are bigger, some that are smaller?
There are some regulatory requirements that require an organization to have a tabletop at least once a year, but that's checking a box. That's not actively preparing necessarily, and it depends. And I do want to say it depends. And Rob, in previous conversations, I said it depends a lot, right? So it depends on the size of the organization. It depends on how mature they already are. It depends on how practiced they already are. It depends on how well qualified their playbooks are, if they're practicing those things in other ways, outside of a formal tabletop exercise, as an example. Regulatory wise, there are compliance requirements in different areas that have at least a minimum of once a year. But if you want to do more than just check the box, if you want to be sure that you are really, truly ready in the event of, there should be a more frequent cadence that is designed more appropriately for your organization based on size and scope and differentiation. We work with organizations that are small, like small groups. They might be really nimble. They might be able to do this a couple of times a year and update and so forth. Other organizations are really large, very federated, if you will. They have their own operating businesses that are segmented out. They need a different approach. So it's an important conversation to have as part of your planning to decide what is the right cadence and how frequently, to what degree, and how integrated. And there's no one size fits all.
I'm going to support you with real quick. It depends. It depends on the one thing I'd say on the size of organization. It also depends on the culture. Do you have an organization that's leaning in to learn more, or hands off, we're okay? And that plays a lot into how you are able to facilitate and plan and prepare.
We've already hit step 5 and talked about regulatory compliance, and I just wanted to call out what's changed in the regulatory landscape that might be important to understand here.
Regulatory is always going to be incredibly important. Whether we're dealing in heavily regulated industries, whether we're looking at how to keep our consumers safe, how to keep our employees safe, how to keep our infrastructure safe. That's why we have regulation. What we're seeing right now is there's obviously with the administration change, there's a lot of calls for regulatory simplification. How do we stop having, in essence, competing three-letter agencies reviewing the same thing? There's also a lot of question about with AI coming in, how do we approach? And not having the same thing we've seen with cyber, which is multiple agencies, regulatory soups, states having one thing, national standard another, as we're bringing AI in. It's going to be an evolving field. It's going to be something that we see changing a lot, I think, over the next year and a half. And companies are really concerned about where it's headed.
Well, and I like your point about lean forward, because I feel like you lean back, I can almost predict that you're going to have a worse of a time responding to things if you think that you can get away with sticking your head in the sand, or potentially thinking things are going to work themselves out over time. Some do, but a lot don't. And meanwhile, everything keeps changing underneath you. As we wrap up, I'm struck by the fact as often, these are great points. As a customer, if I'm looking at this and I'm going, wow, I don't think we've got a complete handle on this. Angela, can you describe how organizations, be it if they've already got a relationship with you or if they don't have a relationship with worldwide technology, how do you recommend they come to you with these type of concerns?
Oh gosh, we welcome every one of these conversations, no matter where an organization may be in their life cycle or where they feel they are in their maturity relative to their resilience posture. There's always work to do. It's repetitive, it's cyclical, it's iterative. It's maybe a better word to use there. There are many different ways to reach us, but just reach out and let's have a conversation about where you are today, where you're trying to go, and work together on a plan to get there.
I think the critical thing is awareness. And every organization wants to be more resilient, but not everyone knows how to action it. And so the steps Angela's outlined, leveraging things like this report, leveraging trusted advisors to understand what the definition of minimum viable business, minimum viable company is, and understanding how and why different stakeholders in the organization are so critical for success. That's what's important.
And with that, let's wrap it up. I want to thank you both for weighing in on this. Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, as we've seen today, cyber resilience isn't just about technology. It's about business continuity in a digital world where disruptions are inevitable. Kate and Angela have provided a clear roadmap for developing a comprehensive cyber resilient strategy that addresses the full life cycle from proactive operational planning to financial risk transfer all the way through to effective response and recovery. Now, remember that quantitative risk assessments aren't just compliance exercises. They provide essential data that helps you make informed decisions about where to invest and what to prioritize. And as you develop your resilience plans, make sure you're bringing together the stakeholders, everyone from across your organization, from technical teams to business units, and of course, executive leadership. Now, for more detailed guidance on building your cyber resilience strategy, I encourage you to download the complete Security Priorities for 2025 research paper from Worldwide Technology's website. This paper is going to provide additional resources and insights both on this topic as well as the other critical security priorities that you should be focusing on. So whether you're just beginning your cyber resilience journey or you're looking to strengthen your existing program, Worldwide Technology can meet you where you are with workshops, strategy sessions, and quantitative risk assessments, just to name a few, all designed to enhance your security posture. Thank you so much for watching this episode of WWT Presents Research. I'm Rob Boyd. I'll see you next time.
This episode is brought to you by Extrahop. Secure, scalable intelligence. Scale with security and agility, security and UX, security and innovation, all in one place. Streamline your defense with data from all aspects of your environment.